Welcome to We Need to Name This, where we unpack the hidden curriculum of academe with scholars of color. So my name is Ebony Bruce Harvey, and my co-host is
Laura Ann Jacobs.
And today's episode is entitled Prelims, Scholarly Papers, and Dissertations. Should I worry? So let's get started. We would like to introduce these wonderful, amazing women of color, Gabby Bernal and Christine Quince. They're going to share their experiences with us. But first, we'd like to share a little bit about them. So I'm going to start with Gabby. Gabby Bernal is a former special education teacher from Watsonville, California. As a third-year doctoral student in the educational studies in teaching and teacher education concentration, she incorporates her lived experience as a teacher, advocate, and community member with experience teaching grades 2 through 10th and supporting intern teachers and novice teachers. Her work is rooted in community to foster understanding and coalition building for educational and social justice. By focusing on mathematics education, teaching practices, and classroom spaces, she not only seeks to disrupt the status quo of overrepresentation of Black and Brown students in special education, but she remains committed to celebrating the love, joy, and excitement with and of Black and Brown children. By exploring formal and informal mathematics settings, focusing on students' voices, she centers the sense-making of children of color and their communities while supporting teachers in the community. Thank you, Gabby, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And I'm happy to introduce Christine Quince. Christine is a proud Detroiter and PhD candidate in the Educational Studies Department with a focus on teaching and teacher education. Her research focuses on the counter stories and experiences Black children have as a way to inform the emerging practice of culturally relevant educators. In her work, Christine centers Black students' voices and has them document their classroom experience using photography. Christine holds both a BA in elementary education and an MA in educational studies from the University of Michigan. As a form of self-care, Christine enjoys reading, traveling, and spending time with her family and friends. Thank you for joining us today, Christine.
Happy to be here.
Well, I'd like to start us off by learning a little bit more about each of you. So would you mind telling us a little bit about why you decided to attend graduate school?
I can start. So I was a former fourth grade teacher, and when I was teaching, I remember talking to a lot of my team members on my fourth grade team, and a lot of them had master's degrees. And so in talking with them, I was just like, well, it's kind of like we're getting paid the same amount, but we're doing we're getting paid differently, but doing the same amount of work. And so in my head, I'm just like, well, that's not really fair. So I decided to pursue a master's degree. And then when I was in my master's program, I remember talking to my principal and saying, like, the stuff that I'm learning, I love it. I really, really like it. And at that time, I was looking at what we could do to better prepare pre-service teachers, because when I was teaching fourth grade, I was still a beginning teacher. And so once I got into the classroom, I was like, oh, okay, there's some stuff that I do know, and there's some stuff that, like, I'm worried that other people may not know that I kind of know, because I have like really good support in my school. And so once I went back for my master's and I told my principal, it's like, okay, I'll be right back. Like, I'm getting this master's and I'll come back. But then I started to explore PhD programs, and I was like, oh, now wait a minute. I could dive deeper than what I've done before. And so that's kind of what led me to grad school in general, like getting my master's, but then for sure, pursuing my PhD.
So I was teaching 8th, 9th, and 10th grade math and science, and for like the last 2 years of my career in the classroom, and I was teaching full-time and also advising and supervising teachers. And a lot of them were intern teachers, and a lot of the needs of the teachers I felt like I had a lot of questions about, in terms of like what their process was in terms of learning how to teach mathematics and teaching science. And then as I was like starting in those last 2 years to really dive into why mathematics was causing these challenges in terms of like thinking about how to push against ability grouping and tracking, I realized that like I needed to do a lot more learning about those things. Like those were things I had definitely resisted in my classroom, but just like telling someone that this is what I do in practice wasn't enough. And so at that point, I decided to apply to programs. And the last year that I was in the classroom, I was doing a lot of tutoring and engagement with students. And I just remember like hearing students be like, oh, like Miss Gabby, like you're gonna be like going back to college. Like when I'm in college, you'll be like finishing like your college like program. And so it was like really great to like share that experience with students and like offer them that like connection as I was like continuing to like learn and grow and pushing myself in that way. So I think the current teachers I was engaged with, the students, and just thinking about like my role and what I needed to take up.
Thank you all for sharing just your experiences and why you came to grad school. I think it's really important for our viewers to just hear different stories and know that like anywhere that you are in your professional life or your trajectory, you can think about this as a way to expand your knowledge and to move forward in your career, etc. So thank you all for sharing your stories. So we have come here today to kind of break down all these milestones that we have to like encounter in grad school. And it's interesting because when I went to grad school, when I applied to PhD program, I had no idea what these milestones were. It's just kind of like, I want to learn about this thing. I got to be there for 5 years. Cool, I'm going. You know what I'm saying? And it's not like, so then when you get there, you're like, okay, so what's a prelim? What's a dissertation? Can I even write that? You know, et cetera. So because you all are in, you know, mid-career, so to speak, in grad school, you've reached a few milestones already. And so we want to ask you a little bit about your experiences. I know at different universities, they call them different things. And but this will give folks an idea of some of the milestones they would have to reach as they go through their PhD journey. So one of the milestones is the prelim or the preliminary examination. Can you all tell us just a little bit about what the prelim is and what purpose does it serve? Now, you both are in a teaching and teacher education program at the University of Michigan, so your prelims are structured pretty much the same. So if one of you can just explain like how the prelim is structured, and then maybe you can talk if you know about the other programs, because some of the programs structure their prelims differently. So if you have some knowledge about that, and then just like, why a prelim? Why do we have to do that? Why is it important? Is it important? Do you think it's important? I think it's really important for us to discuss. So whoever wants to start first, I'd like to hear from both of you all.
First, good question. Especially because I think when you come into a PhD program, like you said, like you don't know all that it encompasses. It's just like in the end, it's like, oh, I get a nice, you know,
robe.
Yeah, robe at the end. Yeah, make my mom proud kind of thing. But like once you're in it, it's like, okay, this is for real. Like y'all not in here playing, which, you know, is fine. So my understanding of a prelim for our program, and our meaning the teaching and teacher education program at the University of Michigan. So we have 2 prelim exams, and in my head, I've like simplified it into like buckets. So Gabby, if you're like, there's more to it, Christine, like keep going. But I've simplified it into like 2 buckets. So the first exam essentially gauges your learning around your coursework, and you're to choose between a list of questions and answering those questions based off of the information that you've learned throughout your coursework. That's my understanding of the first prelim. Or like, that's how I bucket it. Like, okay, prove that you know stuff. It's like, I know stuff, I got you. Then the second prelim, for me at least, it is a way to gauge your pursuit in research. So for me, I was able to conduct a pilot study for something that I was interested in, and it was around Black students' understanding of care and success. And so essentially that prelim, I was able to collect data, interview students, talk with them, analyze the data, and then write it up. And so in that write-up, that was more so like the exam portion in terms of like my committee members. So you gather a committee also during this prelim exam. And so my committee members were able to, give me feedback on how I conducted research, how I analyzed data, what I came up with. And they also gave me some really good thinking questions around the interest that I had at that moment for my exam. So for me, 2 exams. One is for gauging your learning and coursework. The other is for gauging your pursuit and research. Gabby, what you think?
That's so interesting. I was like, oh, we definitely had a very similar process. I think I tried to like keep my trajectory in line with like what other people had done. I'm the only person in TTE in my cohort. So I didn't have that like collective group, but I did connect with Christine and a couple other scholars in our in TTE, and thinking about like reading lists and materials to gather to support those exams. And so I was really thankful for that opportunity. And so my first exam was a little different. Instead of picking from a list of questions, I developed my question with my advisor. I didn't know the question beforehand, but we set some guidelines and parameters in terms of what I would find helpful for that practice of sharing and showing what I've learned over the last couple of years in the program. So thinking about those 2 years of course intensive time and independent reading. So it was really helpful to think about the reading list we had crafted together, the questions that had been framed. I didn't know, but getting those together. And then the second exam, I'm actually currently finishing it up right now, has been, again, like thinking about what is a case study, and going through that process of showing that I know what a case study is, and using data, analyzing it, and really going through that process, like Christine said, showcasing that I'm learning the craft of research. So that's been a really helpful purpose to like keep in mind, like, how is this going to help me for my dissertation and my future work?
Okay, so Gab, you said 2 things that I want to follow up on, one with you and one with both of you and Christine. So the first one is, when you were developing your question, can you just tell us a little bit more detail about that process? So if someone is with their advisor and they're developing a question for a prelim, you don't know the questions ahead of time, but what were some of the things that you did to find good alignment? And if those questions were related to connecting your research to what you've learned in your coursework. And then the question for both of you all is, did you use your prelim to set you up for your dissertation? Or was it just like, I'm just using this to practice research skills? So those 2 questions.
Got it. Yeah. So in terms of crafting the research question, and then I'll pass it over to you, Christine. I had multiple conversations with my advisor over like 3 months, and that was in the fall semester, just really thinking about the reading that I was interested in that I wasn't getting in classes. Okay. So we actually developed an independent study class so I could really dive into that literature. Mm-hmm. There was also a second piece where I really missed the practice of teaching and the practice of guiding and engaging teachers. And so we ended up splitting my prelim to 2 questions. One was more practice-based, where I thought about what a professional development unit or session might be, and if that series of sessions would how that would pull from the literature that I had been learning about. And so that was a direct connection. I didn't create the actual PD or the series. It was just like thinking about like the theoretical aspect of that. So that was a really great exercise to think about creating a program to support teachers and teacher educators. And then the second question was much more in the research field and trying to tease apart those definitions. And I think that was the helpful piece for that dissertation process, thinking about what I mean by the terms that I'm trying to work with.
And then just for the both of you, in terms of connecting your prelim to your research, is that something that you found a connection there? Because like I've talked to some folks and they're just like, I'm doing this. So the second part, the part two, we call the scholarly paper, you know, and they're just kind of like, I'm just trying to get this done. Dissertation will be a different beast in itself. And then other folks are like, no, this is setting me up my preliminary data to then, you know, push me through to my dissertation, or at least to think about my literature review, or et cetera. So I know Gabby said a little bit about how the prelim helped you. Christine, how did it, did you have a connection there, or you did something just separate or different?
So initially, after talking to a lot of people, before starting my prelim, I'm like, okay, this prelim exam, it's gotta set me up for my dissertation. Now, did it? Kind of. And I say kind of because I think as I was able to explore the research questions that I had for that prelim exam, where I was, you know, figuring out what research was, and doing some of the literature reviews, and also I guess finding out the answers to my questions, that was just it. It was like, okay, well, I found the answer. Like, what more could I gather from that to stretch it out for a dissertation? And so from that point, my advisor and I, we had a conversation. I'm like, well, what do you want to do with your prelim? And for me, some of the literature that I've done, it falls into this bucket around things related to my dissertation. So my prelim exam was about Black students' understanding of care and success. And so my dissertation is actually about how students conceptualize or like perceive culturally relevant pedagogy. So there are aspects, and I'll get into what culturally relevant pedagogy is, because of course, jargon for people that are like, ma'am, what are you talking about? But so like there are aspects of how Black students define care and success in this pedagogy, but how I've defined, or like how I've teased apart how culturally relevant pedagogy is defined, where I haven't teased apart. Gloria Ladson-Billings has teased apart, but how she has defined it, because you got to cite your sources now. I don't want her watching this like, ma'am, you didn't even. It's like, and that's not how she talks either. So I don't upset about that. But yeah, how she defines it, I've kind of looked at each aspect of how she's defined each tenet and pulled it apart for how I want to do my dissertation study. So to answer your question, it's like a yes and a no. So like some things overflow, but other things it's like dive deeper, and I can dive a little bit more deep for my dissertation study.
Gotcha. So before I pass it off to Laura Ann, the last question I wanted to ask is how did you all prepare for your prelim and scholarly paper, and what support exists? So Gabby mentioned that because no one else was in teacher and teacher education in her cohort, she, you know, went and she saw you and she was like, hey, you know what I'm saying? You want to study together, you know, and you got that support. So just tell us a little bit about how you prepared and what support maybe exists at the university that when folks are at their university, they could kind of say, hey, I should look for this, or I should get this kind of support when I'm trying to prepare for preliminary exams.
Yeah, I would say for sure so for that first exam for us at University of Michigan teaching and teacher education program, what was helpful was to talk with other folks that were in my cohort or older cohorts about some of the readings that we had. So Typically throughout our program, we all kind of take around, we have required coursework. I won't say we have required coursework that we have to take in order to learn these particular concepts around pedagogy and teaching and all that good stuff, jargon. What was helpful was talking with folks in my cohort as we were learning things and while we were still in coursework, and having like weekly meetings to review some of the readings and to take notes. Like we had a shared document where we were able to take notes and talk about the readings. And in some cases, it required us to reread things. So things that we read during our first year, we were coming back again towards, our second year of like, now what was that about? Let's go back and read and try to define things and ask each other questions about it. So that, I want to say that was like the number one thing that really helped me, was finding folks that are learning with me, and then also asking older folks of like, so what was the prelim like? Like what kind of questions? Like what's that look like? That really helped me.
Yeah, and I think in terms of like what's to add on to what Christine said, thinking about supports that people have used previously. So Elena and Nicole, also in Christine's cohort, had recommended that I enroll in a course at the Writing Center here at Michigan. And they were like, oh, it's like a great course. It's 1 unit and you get to focus on your own writing. And so thinking about like what is available, but also like what have people done and used to support that work. So I'm enrolled in that course now, and have found it really helpful to think about explaining the work that I'm trying to articulate through words to someone that isn't in the field of education has been a really helpful exercise.
So I wanted to ask you, we've been using the term prelim exams. I know other places call them like comprehensive exams, or comps, that kind of stuff. And the language that we've been talking about, it's a paper, right? So it's for us and our experience, it's not a sit down exam.
Yeah.
And Gabby talked about like developing or designing or contributing to the design of the question. So it's kind of a guiding question about your interests, right? So I guess in some ways, how is it different from a term paper, I guess, in a few ways? Like if we could say that too, like, because the idea of you write a paper that's out in the world designed around a question, it's not exactly a course paper or something like that. So I was wondering if we could maybe try to attend to that distinction a little bit more. And then I have a few other kind of questions to kind of understand that maybe analogy.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question, because sometimes you forget how I don't know, you just forget that other folks aren't in your brain or like in your world. So it's like, unpack it. Like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? I would say it is different from a term paper. The prelim exam is different from a typical term paper in the sense that you have to, and it's hard too. It's just like, wow, that was intense. I'm having flashbacks at this point. It's like, oh my God. Yeah. Like you have to figure out a way to answer a question using literature, and to provide examples throughout different folks' literature to prove a point that you want to make for a question that you're trying to answer. The hard part, and that's why I was just like, ooh, that was intense, is that there are so many different ways that you can answer questions. And for me, at least, like I always try to find the right way. Like, well, what's the right answer? What's the right answer? And in many cases, like, well, you tell us. You tell us your thoughts about how to tackle this particular exam question. And it's based off of things that we've learned or talked about in different courses. So different from Gabby's exam, we had a list of questions to pull from. And I remember talking to one of the professor that actually administers the exam to us. Like we talked beforehand about like, okay, what is this like? Don't be afraid, you know, we love y'all, like kind of thing. And she was saying like when we were coming up with a list of questions, we had you all's interest in mind. So it wasn't just like we're pulling stuff from like you better figure out how to answer. It's like, well, we've talked about this in courses. We've talked to other professors that have had you in courses. And so what we've done is we've tried to gather, like we know at least like somebody will be able to answer this question, or this will be an interest to someone so that they can answer it. But yeah, the hard part is just trying to find the answer and craft it in a way that for me, I was trying to craft it in a way that it will always be interesting to me to write about. And that was the hard part. I was like, okay, what do I want to talk about? How do I want to talk about it? Yeah.
Yeah, and I would add for context, I had 17 days to write my 2 responses to the 2 questions I had. And so similarly, like pulling on the material that I've read from courses, heavily pulled from that independent study course that I had taken and crafted and designed with my advisor. And then thinking about like the purpose of my prelim and what I wanted to get out of it was definitely something that Dr. Amber Willis supported me with, and thinking about like some of the things that she had done in terms of getting from her prelim to her dissertation, and how initially she thought that she wasn't going to use her prelim at all for her dissertation. And then that it ended up being something that she pulled some bits from, kind of like Christine mentioned earlier about just pulling like a couple of things here and there. And so it being like more of a maybe that it's connected. Whereas course papers are feeling like much more of like a task to get it done. And you have the reading from the course, and maybe you pull like another 5 to 10 sources in addition to the course reading list that you've had. So I think this was very different in that it was like a bit independent in terms of the reading, and definitely a larger set of text to pull from.
Thank you. Yeah, so we've got this like time constraint on it, is the exam maybe portion of it. You know, Christine said like it's just so intense, it flies by so fast. I can definitely relate to that. So it can feel like very high stakes, very high pressure at some moments. So and Gabby, I heard you at the end there talking about it's different from a term paper, because rather than using course readings to answer something, you're kind of like in a way figuring out like what is the literature that is like contributing to your scholarly identity. It's this kind of like moment of figuring out like who your for scholars are, or whatever that may, you know, whatever term that may be. And so my question is how do you, maybe along the way as you work towards these milestones, work to connect your interests and identities? Like maybe we've talked about how your prelim may help you move towards your dissertation. Are there ways that term papers help you move towards your prelim? Or are there ways that you as scholars have worked to connect your interests and identities across those spaces? And is there advice that you might have for others who may be trying to find that, to find that those connections within their own work?
Yeah, I think I'll add that there's a bit of like a need to, like, you don't know what you don't know. And so like getting a stack of books that people have recommended for reasons that are connected to your interests is really helpful. Having conversations with people around the things that you're interested in, or maybe there's some type of connection that you've had with a particular article that you've read. Read some of the other works by that scholar, even if it's like maybe not directly related to your interests, and you get to learn a bit more about how to continue to build and connect things in a way that makes sense for you and your projects and your interests. I think that's one thing that was really helpful over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I would say too, the best piece of advice that I guess I figured out in grad school was to try to find a way to connect your papers to, like, each paper in every course, like find a way to connect it and add on to it. And in some ways it's helpful, in other ways you can explore different things that you may be interested in. And I'll say that a lot of my papers, like if I were to look back at all of the papers that I've written in grad school, a lot of them, all of them are on, all of them are on Black students. And so their experiences in the classroom. So like, that's when I figured out like, oh, I guess that's like my conceptual framework. Didn't have the language for that at the time, but it was just like, I'm interested in how can I improve Black students' experiences. So there's so many different avenues that you can do that with. And because I was able to explore that in different courses, but of course, coming back to that conceptual framework of like improving Black students' experiences, by the time my prelim occurred, I want to say like one of the questions was around like, there's an increasing population of diverse students. How can you help them? I'm like, that's for me. That question is for me. And like a lot of my work, or a lot of my papers were around like culturally relevant pedagogy, and like what Gabby was saying in terms of diving deeper with terms. That was what I had to do for one of my course papers. So when it came time for my prelim, I was like, I've already defined this. I've already, gone a little bit deeper with trying to figure out like, well, why do people use this term? What does this term mean? What do the tenets mean? And it all relates back to that conceptual framework of like improving Black students' experiences, that pedagogy is one way. So I was like, oh, okay, boom, 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 like fireworks, lightning, all that good stuff. Yeah, so my advice would be to find ways to connect what you're doing with your interests, and to always go back to your interests. Whatever you do, like I would never, there's rarely been a time when I've written a paper that I wasn't interested in, where like it never felt like a task to have to write a paper. It was all, I mean, it is a task, but if we're being honest, it is a task, but like deep down inside, it's like, okay, I'm here for a reason. And the reason is to like try to improve Black students' experiences. How can I do that within this paper? So it's like, okay, go back to that and just move those fingers.
Well, thank you both. That's wonderful advice about, especially for people who may be in their first or second year, who know these prelim things, their comps, whatever, are coming up. And what can I be doing now so that I don't have to end up with 17 days to figure something out and write something, like every little piece along the way. Ebony, I want to ask another question, but
Go for it.
okay. So I know through our pre-recording conversation, Christine has just submitted her dissertation proposal, which is yet another one of these little not a mini mile, but a milestone within a milestone, right? Moving from prelim to there. And I know Gabby is working on completing one of her buckets of the prelim to then push on to her dissertation proposal. So you both are on this kind of cusp of phases, transitioning from one milestone to the next. So congratulations to both of you. And also would just like to ask you, like, what does it feel like to be in this within weeks or, within a month of this moment that has been building up maybe for a few semesters or a few years? Like, how does that feel? What does that feel like?
It honestly, it feels really good. And I think once you finish, so like I remember finishing the prelim and I remember scrolling through the entire document, looking at the page count, like, I can't believe I did that. Like it's always a reflection, like, oh my gosh, all those tears, like all the hard work, late nights, like it's finally done. And the same thing with that dissertation proposal. It is kind of unbelievable. Like the fact that, you start in a program not knowing what you're doing. And then it's like, it's like an out of body experience. Like, oh my gosh, I know what I'm talking. Like after you reread it, it's like, okay, I know a little something. I like that. I like that growth. Okay. But yeah, it's a really good feeling. I remember crying towards the end. I remember like thanking God during it, and then at the end of it, it was like it wasn't all me. It honestly was not all me. It literally was God like pushing, like, come on, you got a purpose. Keep going. It's like I'm moving my fingers to like keep typing. But yeah, it feels really good. It's exciting. In some ways it's you feel kind of anxious, like, oh my God, this is about to end. I gotta get a career. Like, oh, I'm not gonna be a lifetime student anymore. What do I do? But at the same time, like in the moment, it feels really good. So to answer your question, it feels good.
Awesome.
Yes, definitely. It feels so good. And I think there's like such a tribe with us as we go through and like celebrate, and knowing that there's that connection with especially like such a strong group of women in the School of Education, a group of women of color that like just continue to love on each other and celebrate these milestones, and reminding us to just continue celebrating, I think has been such a beautiful experience. And I'll also add like celebrating with my family, like sharing with them as like a first generation college student, let alone like here I am now in a PhD program, and like texting them like, hey, so remember the like last 17 days that I didn't respond to any of your text messages? It's because I was working on this crazy paper. And I've made it. And so they're like, great, so you're a doctor now? It's like, no. Not yet. But just like their jokes and like their love, and just like feeling that has just like kept, as Christine said, like those like moments of like anxiety and like hardship, like just such sweet, tender moments to remember and keep going.
Yeah, because it's almost as if like, like we're on the PhD journey, but it's like our families are also on that journey with us. Like they are right there crying with us, or just trying to motivate us during those late nights. Like, you gotta just, take a break and come back to it. Because in some ways, like they kind of understand, but they don't really understand, because it's like they're not in it. Like they're in it with you, like to like motivate you to keep you going, but also it's like they don't necessarily understand everything that's like floating through your mind and all the things that you have to think through and try to work out. But yeah, the family aspect is a huge portion of like pushing through, honestly.
Well, I second and third everything you said, because it's been the same experience for me as well. So I know we're running low on time, so I want to ask you one more question before we go. And the question is really about how you maintain joy, how you maintain your well-being and your confidence as you work towards these goals. So academia can really be a space that, pulls on every insecurity you might have about your knowledge, about your ability to thrive, about your just ability to compete in some ways. And so how do you kind of stay grounded? How do you keep yourself well with all the pressure of grad school?
Mm-hmm.
I think definitely taking risks, like knowing that what's expected and what's been done isn't necessarily what needs to be done, and being willing to like push against that and like reimagine what's taking place. I think that's offered me a lot of joy, and thinking about the tasks that I've created for myself. I know that I'm learning as I create those spaces and tasks with other people, and also like the process in that journey, and continuing to reflect and remembering that like I'm not just a graduate student, and definitely like holding true to like that former teacher me, and remembering like why I'm here, and connecting with students. I think those are really the joy of like cooking a beautiful meal and sharing that with a colleague or a friend, or really thinking about how to continue to maintain me at my core outside of academia.
Yeah, that's a great point. I would add that in order to maintain myself, like I have to crack jokes. Like it's just I have, like if I'm not cracking a joke, if I'm not smiling, if this doesn't end up being fun, then it's like, well, what was the point? Like, why did you do all of that? So like in the back of my head, I've always been like, well, is it still fun? Like I have to ask myself, like, is this still fun? And if the answer is no, it's like, okay, well, finish, but then find something else. But thus far, like there are aspects of it being fun. And I think something that helps me to continue moving forward is my best friends. And then also like my family, like talking to them. And I think talking to them about my research and trying to make sure that it's more so like an aspect of code switching. Like, am I able to code switch from like the language of academia, like using words like pedagogy, and then like translate that to, talking to my best friends about it. And they're like, Chris, what are you talking about? And like, if I'm still able to do that, I'm just like, okay, cool. Everything's fine. And then I think too, something that my mom usually tells me when I'm overwhelmed with papers or I'm feeling very stressed, she'll say, well, how do you eat an elephant? And the answer is always one bite at a time. So it's like, how do you tackle this PhD? How do you tackle this paper? How do you tackle this paragraph? How do you tackle this sentence? One bite at a time, like literally continuously moving forward towards the goal. Cause like it will get done. Like there's no doubt about it. Like it always gets done. How is always like I don't know, but at the end of the day, it will always get done. And I will feel good about it because it's like, this is the gift that God has given me, and he's continuously like pushing me through this program. So because I have that mindset, and because I know that this is a part of my purpose of being on earth is to help Black kids, it's like, all right, well, let's keep going. Let's do it.
That's awesome. Thank you, ladies, so much for just sharing your experiences. I mean, thinking about prelims and dissertations and all that gets very like just wishy-washy and like elusive. People throwing these words around and you're like, okay, I know I have to do that in a year, but what is it exactly? Yeah. And I feel like I spent my first like year or two just asking people what a prelim is and still not really understanding it until I had to do it. But it's good to just hear about people's experiences and you all breaking down just like how you prepared for it, what it is, the things that you had to do, being able to create your own questions or have a list of questions for you. That preliminary examinations or comprehensive examinations can look different from university to university. So it's really important to pull on your community to find out what their experiences were like. Has the test or the prelim changed? What was it before? Talking to your advisor, just doing those things. So thanks for the advice that you have provided and your experiences that you provided for our viewers.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.
Yes. Thank you so much. This was a ton of fun. I'm so thankful to have had this opportunity.
Yeah, and it's a really good reflective moment. Like even just thinking back, like, oh my God, I did do that. And I'm here I am talking about it as if I know what I was doing.
You did. Okay. You figured it out.
Look at that. I figured it out. And people watching this, like, you too can figure it out. Like everything is just fine.
Any last words, LA, before we go?
I just messing with you.
Okay. You did that. You're funny. I got you.
No last words for me. I'm just so happy to spend time with both of you today and to hear your wisdom and reflections and sharing your joy about the accomplishments that you've reached so far and recently. So congratulations, and we also wish you the best as you move on to your next milestones along the way.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a great day.
Great, you too.
You too.
Thank you for joining us for We Need to Name This, a series where we unpack the hidden curriculum of academe. Join us for our next episode, What is a Dissertation? With Ashley Jackson. For more information, Visit www.weneedtonamethis.com.